Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it gives me great pride to rise today and speak to Bill C-45. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud to rise today in the House to speak about Bill C-45.
Surgeon, I spent most of my professional career putting children back on the playground to play. En tant que chirurgien pédiatre.
As a pediatric surgeon, I've spent most of my professional career putting kids back on the playground to play.
This bill is exactly the opposite of taking care of kids. This bill will make it easier to put marijuana in the hands of Canadian children. Liberals like to talk about evidence-based decision-making and the importance of science. The science on this issue is clear. Marijuana is a dangerous drug for our young people. It affects their developing brains. We know that children's brains develop until the age of 25 and that marijuana can have an impact that is negative on that development. The results lower graduation rates from high school, fewer opportunities as adults, as well as high rates of mental health challenges. Mr. Speaker, these are the evidence-based facts. And I accept that in limited circumstances that marijuana can and should be prescribed by a qualified physician for purchase in a pharmacy for those who need it for medical purposes, whether that be someone with cancer or a veteran with PSTD. However, as I stated earlier, I disagree with the Liberal government's proposed legislation. The government should be working on making sure marijuana is less accessible to our youth, not increasing its availability. Now, Mr. Speaker, I've had the opportunity to meet with children continually in clinic regularly as a parliamentarian. And I'm always amazed at how well-informed they are about current issues. Young people know about the proposed changes, and their reaction has been clear. You know what they're saying? They say, you know, I don't understand, Dr. Leitch. I'm told not to do drugs. Can I do this drug now? Les jeunes savent que les...
Young people know that marijuana is a drug, and they know that it is dangerous for them. Now we have a government who is telling young Canadians that it's okay to do drugs.
Mr. Speaker, after years of respecting the science and telling kids that drugs are harmful for their growing bodies, the Liberals are simply throwing these evidence-based facts out the window. Kids are confused. They know that marijuana is bad for their health, but they now are wondering if it's okay to do this based on the messaging from our government and Prime Minister. These are the kinds of messages Canadian parents do not want portrayed to their kids. Leaving aside the mixed messages that this government is sending out to youth, Mr. Speaker, as a physician, I want to focus on the science of this issue. Human bodies develop continually into their 20s. As I mentioned earlier about the science, the brain experiences the same development schedule until the age of 25. Much as we do our best to ensure that youth are making healthy choices for their developing bodies, impedant l'excès de la marijuana.
By allowing access to marijuana in our houses and throughout society, we will be putting our children in danger.
Let's begin with some disturbing statistics. The Canadian Centre on Substance Abuse reported in 2013 on the Canadian Tobacco, Alcohol and Drug Use Survey that 10.6% of Canadians aged 15 and older reported cannabis use in the last year. It also reported that cannabis use is generally more prevalent amongst young people, 22% of youth from 15 to 19, 26% in young people 20 to 24. Approximately 28% of Canadians aged 15 and older who use cannabis in the last 3 months report daily use. In addition, in 2014, a published study by The Lancet found that youth who utilize marijuana on a regular basis have a 60% lower chance of graduating from high school or university. Ferguson, in 1996 study, published in the Journal of Abnormal Child Psychology, Ellickson in 1998 in the Journal of Drug Issues, Leitch writing in the Journal of Addictions in 2003, all found a strong correlation, direct correlation between the increased use of marijuana and teenagers had an increased dropout rate in high school. Talk about limiting the opportunities for young Canadians in the future. Let's give them marijuana so they can drop out of school. Gilman, writing in the Journal of Neuroscience, is also very clear on the impact on the developing brain. In a study published in 2014, Gilman demonstrated that people between the ages of 18 and 25 that use cannabis on a regular basis will experience structural changes to their brain. These are not temporary changes that happen when you have a high. These are permanent structural changes to their brain for the future, which correlate with the negative impacts that I've been talking about. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Canadian Medical Association has done some excellent work compiling and conducting research on marijuana use. It includes their submission to the government's 2016 Task Force on Marijuana Legalization and Regulation, and they talk about their long-standing concerns of the health risks to Canadian youth, given that their brains are undergoing rapid and extensive development. The CMA has also noted that the lifetime risk of dependency on marijuana estimates at about 9%. That means about 1 in 10 Canadians who use marijuana have a chance of becoming dependent, with all of the serious negative health ramifications and social consequences of this drug use. The CMA also went on to further note that the risk of dependence actually doubles to 17% if this is initiated in adolescence. Again, we see the earlier children start to use marijuana, the higher the chance of addiction, the higher the chance of lifelong structural brain changes. Further, the CMA has also warned Canadians of the increased risks of anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, and marijuana users, particularly amongst youth. Those who are already prone to psychosis, for example, if they have a family member suffering from a psychosis, are especially at risk of developing psychosis with cannabis use. Andreasen's extensive study of 15 years of follow-up of over 50,000 men, published again in The Lancet, outlines and reports that those who tried cannabis by the age of 18 were 2 to 4 times more likely to be diagnosed with schizophrenia than those that were not. The study further goes on to say that it estimates that 13% of these schizophrenia cases could be averted if cannabis use had been prevented. Just imagine, Mr. Speaker, what would happen if we didn't allow children to have access to marijuana, as this legislation will allow. Don't we want to protect Canadian kids? Mr. Speaker, there's also a public safety concern with this legislation. First, regarding young people, cross-Canada student alcohol and drug studies show 13 to 21% of students who try this are actually driving within an hour. Hall found in 1994 in his study that short-term memory and attention deficits, motor skills, reaction times, impaired while you are intoxicated with cannabis. That the evidence shows, and it's no surprise, that associated with this, a higher risk of motor vehicle accidents. These are serious situations that place the individual and the public at risk. However, despite this substantive evidence, as I've outlined in multiple journals so far, the Liberals are pushing ahead with this legislation. Now let's look at some additional evidence from Colorado, the state that was mentioned earlier. This includes a rise in traffic-related deaths, increased hospitalizations, cyclical vomiting syndrome. Most disturbing is the overdoses in children due to marijuana use in edibles and those that are accidentally ingested. Negligence by caregivers leading to the increased overdosage by kids. I wonder how many young people might have access to marijuana now, Mr. Speaker, that is being grown in their own home. Save for these shocking facts in Colorado, all of this research has primarily been done in places where this is actually illegal, not legal. Now, I shudder to imagine how those statistics will escalate with this legislation.
Now, they'll say, well, that won't happen. Things will be better for kids. But I totally disagree.
As this legislation states, children will be allowed to possess and parents to grow marijuana in their homes. Access will be easy, and that access is harmful to young Canadians. Young Canadians and children know they shouldn't do drugs, and they have good reason for that. We don't allow access to alcohol for children at the age of 12. We spend millions of dollars telling children not to do drugs. So why is our society flip-flopping now? Because we have a Prime Minister who has to justify his own use. And by doing this, he's putting all Canadian children at risk. I encourage all members of this House, especially those in the Liberal Party opposite, to have a hard look at the science and at their conscience, because they're putting the children in their own ridings at risk with this legislation. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Merci. Bonne idée.
Before we go to questions and comments, I have a notice that